Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and His kingdom. We're going to be visiting about some challenges that the country we love is facing from, yes, enemies, foreign and domestic, with one of our most formidable contributors to this program. His name is Rod Martin. He has become something of a phenomenon of late with punditry and prognostications, not just here, but in the larger universe, on stage and screen, as they say, as we could not be more delighted to see his Rod Martin report catching fire, subscribers abounding, and you can find it all at rodmartin.org, and I urgently hope that you will take full advantage of what Rod is able to disseminate through that channel, as well as through his weekly visits with us. And I am especially pleased to say we're going to get a full hour of his time on this occasion. And again, could not be more pleased. Rod, welcome back, my friend. It's great to have you with us.
Wonderful to be here, and that's very high praise from one of the leading figures of national security thought of our era. And I'm just so grateful for your work and your work at the Institute for the American Future and all the many things you've done in your career. So much appreciated.
Thank you, Rod. It's a mutual admiration society. We can stipulate to that. But I want to thank you. I didn't get around to saying it on this occasion. I was going to do it in the next block. But your role in establishing the Institute for the American Future, and of course it being its chairman of the board, is really extraordinarily helpful and deeply appreciated as well. Let me turn to a couple of topics that you've been noodling of late, and in some cases not without with a lot of company, I have to say. Who knew that there was a war underway between the Taliban in Afghanistan and the government of Pakistan? We touch on it from time to time, but a shooting war had erupted in recent days, and you commented on it at Rod Martin Reports. Give us a little bit of the background, Rod, as to the parties to this fight and what has got to be of concern about it.
Clearly Sam Faddis knew about it, and you knew about it, and about 3 other people probably did outside of South Asia, because everybody's focused on Gaza and Ukraine. So yeah, this is going on under everybody's nose. And we have a deep dive on it for anybody who's interested at rodmartin.org. It's up on the top of the front page. So check that out. It's also got some cool pictures in it of Pakistan bombing Kabul, for heaven's sake. Who'd have thunk it, right? So anyway, these guys have gotten into it, and it's a two-pronged thing. You know, what the Afghans want to achieve, this is all coming from the Taliban, let's be clear. You know, Biden should not have handed them a country. That was a mistake. So here we are. Oh my goodness, yes. And they're using that arsenal, and in many cases outgunning the Pakistani army with an American arsenal, an American night vision, all this stuff that Biden left them. So anyway, what are they trying to do? Well, first and foremost, and what is likely to succeed, is they are trying to create a problem for a key Chinese ally, Pakistan, that China really can't do without, because China is just completely invested in Pakistan in terms of Belt and Road. They're looking to create what is in effect a modern-day Burma road through Pakistan, so that they can bypass, for supply from the Middle East and elsewhere, they can bypass the U.S. Navy's absolute stranglehold on Malacca and Sunda and Lombok. So this is really...
Those are, of course, important
Yes.
straits in Southeast Asia.
I mean, we
that
can cut them off.
their oil goes through at the
We can
moment.
completely cut China off from oil. We can completely cut China off from its agricultural imports, pretty much at will, which is one of the reasons we've been able to stave off a war in Taiwan, because the cost is pretty high to get foul of the U.S. Navy. So anyway, China's been trying to get out of that box for quite some time. Pakistan is key to it. They're also jointly developing the J-10 fighter with Pakistan. We saw that in combat with India earlier this year, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what does Afghanistan want to do by poking the Chinese bear? Well, actually, it makes a lot of sense because they aren't getting the Chinese investment that we all thought they would get after Biden handed over to the Taliban. The Chinese have decided that dealing with the Taliban is worse than dealing with street thugs. There's just no way to do it. They're not trustworthy, and they're constantly robbing you. And so they just haven't gone into Afghanistan in the way that a lot of people thought, and I was one of them. And that's what the Afghans are trying to provoke. They want to put China in the position of needing to mediate a peace, and the key to that peace is going to be significant Chinese investment in Afghanistan. Okay, everybody's happy. None of that's going to go to Kandahar. None of that's going to go to Kunduz. It's all going to go to somebody's Swiss bank account. And, it's going to go to terrorist groups. It's going to be a disaster. But that's what they're aiming for. And the Chinese very well may accommodate them. At the extreme end, though, as Sam Faddis has written brilliantly about, the real problem is that the Taliban has a meaningful presence in Pakistan, both as guerrillas in the frontier areas, but also infiltrated into the military and the ISI, which is the intelligence service. These things could get you to a Taliban takeover of a real country. Afghanistan, by no standard, is a real country, but Pakistan absolutely is. With 250 million people, a couple hundred nuclear weapons with delivery systems, just a real military. And that, in the hands of what is effectively a terrorist band, makes Iran look like nothing. It's really horrifying. So this is the extreme end. It's not super probable, but it is what they're working on. And there's no question that we need to pay attention to it.
Undoubtedly. Rod, you mentioned Sam Faddis several times. Of course, he's well known to this audience, one of our regular contributors as well. And he spent some, I think, probably unsavory years working for the CIA behind enemy lines in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan. And in our conversations about what might eventuate here, he always points out that, as you say, Taliban are us. They're inside the wire in Pakistan, inside the intelligence service, inside the military, and some of those nuclear weapons are deployed around the country in places that you might well see a commander defect and take his goodies with him into Taliban hands. It's a very fraught situation indeed, and I imagine that further incentivizes the Chinese to try to, tamp things down. But it's a very interesting question, isn't it, as to at what expense? Are they going to be rewarding these brigands? Are they going to be, essentially enabling them to steal more of China's stuff? It's also interesting, and maybe we could talk about it on the other side of a short break here. President Trump brooded the idea recently about getting back into Bagram, major air base there that's in close proximity to some of the interesting places in China, like their nuclear weapons deployed facilities. A lot to cover here, Rod, and we're so appreciative that you're giving us an hour to do it. We'll be right back with more with Rod Martin right after this. We're back, and we are joined for this full hour with the great Rod Martin. He is a man of extraordinary credentials. He was one of Peter Thiel's colleagues at the founding of PayPal. He has gone on to a variety of entrepreneurial and business activities, as well as now punditry. And we welcome him to that space. He does it prodigiously well, both here and in a host of other platforms. And we're very grateful for his visits each week, but especially on a protracted basis for the purpose today. And Rod, that gives us a chance to drill down a little bit more on this story about Afghanistan and the Taliban and China and Pakistan. As I mentioned there towards the end of the last block, President Trump, as he is wont to do, sort of spitballed the other day the idea that the United States might want to get back into this very large, well, you know, built and I think quite formidable airbase known as Bagram, from which the United States military operated for many years. One of the things you mentioned we thought would happen after the fall of Afghanistan, with Joe Biden essentially surrendering the place, was that the Chinese would take over that base. Don't know what they've done. They seem to have expropriated some of the vast arsenal that was left there, for sure, as have others, including, of course, the Taliban themselves. But what do you think of that idea, sir? And if these are brigands, would we want to be doing business with them, do you think?
I think that the Bagram idea is probably improbable, but it's really cool in a Trumpian kind of way, because the real issue for China, and the reason they're going to end up paying off the brigands, is the brigands have options. You know, the Afghan foreign minister was in New Delhi in the middle of all this. You know, if Afghanistan suddenly flipped to India, it really, really puts the hurt on Chinese strategy going back 20 years. And they can't afford for that to happen. Likewise, who else is an option for them? Well, they could bring the U.S. back into Bagram and other things. And you say, well, that's crazy. Yeah, but politics makes strange bedfellows. We allied with Stalin, too. So, you know, what this is I think Trump asking for something he wants that he thinks he might be able to get, because he's hoping we can flip Afghanistan from China and possibly reduce the likelihood that Pakistan is a real asset to China. And at the same time, the Afghans are going to play off that to try to convince the Chinese to come in and really help them monetarily. So we'll see how it goes. It's kind of one of those things that costs us nothing and probably won't happen, but it could. And if it did, it's phenomenal, because Bagram puts us in range of everything in Iran, everything in Pakistan, and certainly key parts of China. So that's really good real estate if we could get it back. And if Biden hadn't been just a complete idiot, we would still have it.
You know, fascinating thought. There's also, turning to our next topic, a prodigious quantity of lithium, we're told, in Afghanistan. And it was widely expected that the Chinese were going to go in and exploit it massively. You say they seem less interested in that at the moment. But it introduces the topic of rare earth minerals and what China has been doing relentlessly to corner the market on them, particularly refined rare earths. Give us just a short tutorial, if you would, Rod, on why these things are so important. They're not all that rare, it turns out, but we don't have as much of them, certainly in the refined state, as we need, and the Chinese are saying they're going to cut us off from them on November 1st. Give us the backstory, if you would, and then where we go from here.
Well, they're rare compared to iron or hydrogen. You know, that's what that signifies. But they are absolutely abundant. The United States has enough by itself to supply 85% of the entire world's needs. What we don't have is the mining capacity to do that, and much, much more importantly, the refining capacity. China controls 92% of rare earths refining on planet Earth, which is just absurd, and it's a dereliction of duty by successive U.S. administrations. We used to supply our own needs, and now it's the exact opposite. So we're making really great progress on that. From an Afghan perspective, this is just the tip of the iceberg. If somebody could get a handle on Afghanistan and actually economically develop it, it would be crazy rich. They've got everything. It's just ridiculous, and not just poppies. They've got real stuff, and yet nobody can, because if you go and try to, mine in a mountain or something, the Taliban are just going to kill you. And, that's been the history while we were occupying, to the degree that that's accurate. It's certainly true now, and that's the problem the Chinese have with the Taliban. They just can't do business with them. So there's this huge pot of gold at the end of a very thorny rainbow that nobody really wants to deal with. And ironically, it's the Taliban trying to force everybody to deal with it.
Yeah. It might have been a good idea to put the Taliban out of business, don't you think?
Actually.
if
I
only
thought
we
that's
were
what we were there to do.
If only we were serious about it, we might well have had a very different outcome. So you point out, Rod, that in a piece that Rod Martin reports, and again, you can find all of that at rodmartin.com.
.org.
I keep doing that, don't I? I apologize.
So close.
I always think of you as a .com kind of guy, but here you are, an org kind of guy. So, Rod, talk, if you would, for 2 minutes at least, about how the United States got itself in a position where it's got all these rare earths, it desperately needs them, and yet it can't either mine them efficiently, apparently, at least at the moment, or process them. What's up with that?
Well, again, dereliction by successive administrations. And I don't have to tell you, but it's worth your audience hearing once in a while. There has been the belief that the bottom line is the bottom line, that really everybody's motivated by money, and so you can get the Chinese to play ball if you just pay them and blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, that's true to a point. But there's a point beyond which that's just dumb, because there actually are nation states, contrary to some of our libertarian friends. There actually are nation states, and they actually have interests that are not the bottom line. And so there are just some crucial industries that you have to have domestically to be able to protect your people. A good example of that is pharmaceuticals, which Donald Trump is doing a great job of incentivizing to move back into North America. We are completely dependent on China for pharmaceuticals. They could cut us off in an instant. And we saw that with protective equipment, masks, all these different things that you supposedly had to have during the lockdowns. They just cut the United States off for a period of time because they wanted it for themselves. And so, this is a terrible vulnerability. Not that we were made any safer by using masks, but that's not the point. Okay, this is one of those. Rare earths, the general take was, it's dirty to mine them, refining is difficult, we'll just outsource this to the Chinese, let them pollute their country, and we'll take the product of it. Now, the people who made those kinds of decisions think of themselves as being green, and there's nothing green about what I just said. It's just NIMBY, not in my backyard, which is a very different thing. So,
hold the thought, Rod. I want to come back to our backyard and what we could do to extract this stuff in a, well, if not green, clean way. Rod Martin's in the house. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back. So is Rod Martin. Praise the Lord. We're talking with the chairman of the board of the Institute for the American Future and the proprietor of rodmartin.org. we're going to get that right one of these days. Rod, we're so appreciative that you've given us a full hour of your time, and again, it allows us to explore some of these topics in a little bit more depth and detail. So the processing as well as the extraction of rare earths is a dirty business. We chose to send it elsewhere in the name of our own green rectitude, without regard for the fact that it is horrifically despoiling places like China. But now we're bringing it back as part of a reshoring effort the president's making. You mentioned pharmaceuticals, among many other things, necessarily so. The kinds of supply chain dependencies we've had on China are strategically misbegotten, to say the least, and reckless indeed in many cases. So talk to me about what it will take for us to actually do the mining and refining of rare earth minerals in a responsible way here, and how fast are we making progress in that direction?
Well, technology has advanced a good bit since the 70s and 80s, and so a lot of that is feasible off the shelf at this point. Are there things we could do to make it cleaner? Well, sure. Everything is a process of ongoing improvement. So there's no question about that. The biggest problem right now is we just don't have refining capacity. That doesn't mean we don't have any refining. So the biggest player in this area by far is MP Materials. You'll recall that the Pentagon took a 15% stake in that company recently, which is a whole other conversation. But basically, what they decided to do was, rather than grant them money that the taxpayer never got back, invest the money and then presumably eventually sell it off at a profit. So anyway, MP Materials, MP stands for Mountain Pass, as in the Mountain Pass mine in California, which actually produces more than 100% of the rare earth oxides that we require. It doesn't produce everything that we need, and that isn't processing, that's just raw material. But the biggest single thing we're dependent on China for is actually a special kind of magnets, which are especially important for things like the F-35 or the iPhone. And this requires processing, and we are seeing that ramp up in a big way. MP Materials, in particular, is developing its Independence facility in Fort Worth, Texas. They're already open. They're already working. Right now, they can produce about 10% of what the United States needs. When that plant expansion is complete, probably 2028, 2030, they'll be able to supply 30% of U.S. needs. And it's not just Department of War. It's not just the War Department that's doing this. Apple has put $500 million into MP Materials for the exact same purpose. So this is gonna happen. Another big player that's worth paying attention to, and there are several, but Ramaco Resources is particularly interesting for its Brook mine in Wyoming. It's the first new rare earths mine in the United States in over 70 years, and they're building a processing plant on site. That's going to be a really big deal. Now, in addition to that, I would just quickly note that there's a reason Donald Trump is so interested in the rare earth elements in Ukraine and in Greenland and in the Congo and in Australia. We do need supply and we do need diversified processing, but I would just point out that in extremis, the United States by itself could supply 85% of the entire world's needs. And again, we have information on this at rodmartin.org if anybody wants to follow up on it.
So you started by saying that the reason he's interested in all of these foreign places is diversified supply. Is there anything else that is operating there, Rod? I'm thinking in particular that the quantities of this stuff that are required. I heard the other day that a single automobile battery requires something like 500 tons of this stuff. Could that possibly be right? I mean, it's just unimaginable that there's this kind of consumption involved. Who on earth would have that kind of quantity
Well,
to support
obviously,
it?
you don't have a 500-ton car battery. So, what we're talking about there is the raw material. And did we mention it's rare earths? Like I said, it's rare compared to iron or hydrogen or oxygen, but it's also a relatively small component of what comes out of larger mines. So, for instance, the Brooks mine is primarily a coal mine, but it's got a ton of rare earths sprinkled in the coal. So you've got to refine that out, and that's part of why the process is dirty. But it doesn't have to be super dirty, just like we have clean coal now. We can have clean rare earths, clean-ish, and yeah, the quantity's there. Like I said, the United States by itself, if it really went on a crash program and really wanted to do this, we could supply 85% of the world's needs, not just our own, the whole world. We're just not probably gonna, because if you diversify that supply chain a bit, it minimizes the environmental problems and maximizes the competition.
Yeah, the minimizes the environmental problems here at least.
Yeah.
Rod, thank you for that detailed explanation, because it's obviously a thing, especially if the Chinese do bring the hammer down. I guess last question on that point: do you anticipate that they will implement this, or is this all part of the negotiating dance with the United States on other trade issues?
I think that it's a dance. And I do think that when Trump was blindsided by Xi's threat and then comes back within 48 hours saying, I just think Xi had a bad day, I think what we may be seeing is the tip of the iceberg of what appears to be significant turmoil in the Chinese leadership. Xi may be under real threat. He may not be the leader of China for a lot longer. I could be wrong about that, but a lot of smart people think this at this point. It's a little hard to read those tea leaves, just like criminology was hard. Nevertheless, I don't think that it requires that extreme an explanation. I think the Chinese are taking a page out of Art of the Deal, and they're making some huge, crazy demand right at the end of the negotiation to try to shake things up and get a little bit better deal. But I think we're on track for a deal, and I think there's a reason Donald Trump put off the 100% tariffs to November 1, to give everybody enough breathing room to be able to do that maneuvering and finish a deal.
Well, we'll be watching this very closely, as will you, Rod. In fact, as we speak, I think there's a fourth party plenum that is underway, in which many people think, Xi's fate may be determined. There's a lot of speculation that the purges that have been taking place in the military bespeak a purge that may yet happen in the senior ranks of the party as well. And to what end? What effect that will have on some of Xi's ambitions and the dangers associated with them, obviously, it remains to be seen, too. We look forward to your expert analysis and commentary on all of that. Rod, let me turn. We've got about 2 minutes before we have to take another break, but there's so much to talk about on this subject that I want to make sure we have plenty of time with you. In the past weekend, there was a demonstration on an epic scale, I guess one might call it. Some 7 million people are said to have participated in thousands and thousands of various rallies and protests and parades and what have you, under the banner of No Kings. That is a reference to the idea that Donald Trump is turning himself into a king. And I'd ask you, I guess, to start with, what's the evidence of that as you see it, sir?
Well, there's none whatsoever. Donald Trump abides even by completely bogus, unconstitutional federal district court rulings, from left-wing activists who just routinely get knocked down even by the Ninth Circuit. He abides by these rulings, and then once they're overturned, he acts. That's not how a king acts. I'd go even further. You couldn't have a no kings protest in a country that had a king. And in fact, they did these globally, and in countries that actually had kings, they changed the name to no tyrants. So, they're just such hypocrites. But the big point here is that no kings is a reflection of the fact that they have played out fascist and Nazi and literally Hitler to such a degree that it almost doesn't have an effect. And I don't think kings really has a big effect on Americans. So I think it's kind of bad persuasion. Certainly not the kind of persuasion we see routinely from Trump. And so it just falls flat. Plus,
hold the thought on the plus, sir. We have to take a short break. We'll be right back with Rod Martin on the plus side of the no kings issue. Stay tuned for much more with the driving force behind Rod Martin Reports right after this. Well, welcome back. We're doing one of my favorite things, which is to blue sky a bit with a man who does that on an epic scale. His name is Rod Martin. He has a marvelous product. He calls it the Rod Martin Report. You can find it at rodmartin.org. You will also find there many of his interviews, including, I'm happy to say, some with me, but also many others, and assorted guest authors who are also very much worth your while. And it's just a terrific online resource for which we are highly, highly appreciative. Rod, you were describing some of the, shall we say, untenable aspects of this whole No Kings movement, including, a terribly, not terribly persuasive name, as you say. And then you were about to introduce another topic, and I wanted to make sure we covered it.
Well, it's just funny and a degree of mockery, to be sure. These rallies, you would expect this rainbow coalition, to borrow a term from Jesse Jackson. That's not what you see at No Kings rallies. These guys are all aging hippies. These people cut their teeth at Woodstock. And honestly, if you brought up like the equivalent of a food truck that just sold them Depends and Fix-It-In, you'd make a fortune. It's just laughable. And this is another thing about the whole left in America that has gotten really, really tragic from their point of view. They are losing Gen Z men. Gen Z men have moved heavily Republican. Normally the youth vote is 2/3 Democrat, and then they kind of age into some sense over time. But right now they've lost Gen Z men, and church attendance among Gen Z has tripled in a 5-year period, which is just amazing. So that's not good for the leftist social agenda. And you're seeing tremendous upswings everywhere that, honestly, Donald Trump winning 7 swing states out of 7 is just the tip of the iceberg. I think we've got a real shot at several more blue states that nobody really thinks possible yet, because first, we're doing the hard work of organizing them, which historically the Republican Party didn't do. And second, we're actually going to see them lose a lot of House seats and electoral votes over the next 5 years, because Their numbers are going to be deflated by the mass deportations. Trump is up over 500,000 deportations already. That's just the beginning. We don't have processing capacity for as many as we could. That's why you now have Alligator Alcatraz and Deportation Depot and the Speedway Slammer and so forth. We've got to have processing capacity to get them in front of a judge to send them away. But 500,000 already. And that's just going to ramp up.
And quite a number self-deporting, as I understand.
Oh, yes. 2 million, I believe, is the latest number on self-deportations. Okay, pretty quickly, you dramatically reduce the population counts in states like California, Illinois, New York. And so they're going to lose even more House seats than they were already going to lose. They're going to lose even more electoral votes than they were going to lose. And on top of that, guess who's gaining them? It's Florida and Texas, which are redder than red. So this is really a long-term trend the Democrats have to figure out. And honestly, it's the main reason they're resorting to so much political violence now. They're frustrated and desperate, and they know that their near takeover of this country is unraveling before their eyes.
Mm-hmm. Well, this brings me to a piece of this business with no kings that is concerning, and that is the possibility for more violence to be essentially engendered by this, if not condoned. And you and I have discussed several aspects of this in the past, Rod, where it's not just the aging hippies or their kids in the basement who are joining Antifa. It's also potentially a lash up between them and certain jihadist elements and Chinese soldiers, for heaven's sakes. By some estimates, there are more than 100,000 of them in this country. What's your assessment of the prospect that violence will in fact not only take place but be accompanied by this kind of partnering?
Well, they want it to. I mean, they really, really want it to. And anybody who lived through the 60s and 70s, I mostly didn't. I was born in 69. But, anybody who lived through that era will remember that we had a period of years where we averaged 1,500 domestic terror bombings in the United States per year. For the entirety of the 70s, it was an average of 500 a year, but that's because it tapered off a lot in the Carter years. So, who were these people doing this? Well, they were leading lights of the modern Democratic Party, and they were the terror wings of the Democratic Party. The Klan became passé, so they moved on to the Weather Underground and SDS and, all these, the Black Panthers, all these other groups that explicitly espoused violence and explicitly engaged in it. And David Horowitz did a brilliant job of showing that in many cases the Black Panthers were just basically a mafia and were aiming at money as much as revolution, which may be part of why they were thwarted ultimately. That's what the left wants now. They want to provoke the revolution. And in every country where the left has gotten to this stage, we've been watching this for 100 years now. In every country where they have gotten to this stage of the process, they have tried to provoke a revolution, which they are trying to do by provoking Donald Trump. That's why they're attacking ICE agents. That's why they're attacking FBI. They're doing this stuff to try to provoke an overreaction from the administration that sparks a revolution. And Trump's probably not going to give it to them. You could have a Kent state happen that nobody can control for, but if it's isolated, it's probably not going to matter that much in the grand scheme of things. They want Trump to overreact because they've misjudged him. They think he really is a tyrant, and he's not. So he's not going to do what they think.
Fascinating analysis. Rod, we have to take a short pause. There's another piece of this that I want to tease out with you, something our friend Reggie Littlejohn has called the digital Gulag, and how that might play into the aspirations of the revolutionaries, among others. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. We're back for a final installment of a very special hour with our friend Rod Martin, leader of our Institute for the American Future, which, did I mention it, makes this program possible. It is a wonderful organization sponsoring 5 different coalitions that are working on such problems as the Chinese Communist Party and the Sharia supremacists and the godless globalists and the persecutors of Christians and those who would have our military less than great. These are sort of topics that we try to address on this program, and if you're interested in participating in helping with solutions to these various challenges, please check us out at usfuture.org. Rod, I wanted to just set the stage for this last conversation with a couple of thoughts of my own. Our Sovereignty Coalition has for quite some time been concerned about a kind of creeping effort to insinuate here what is taking place elsewhere and is very much part of the agenda of some of these globalist organizations like, well, the United Nations and the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum, namely to have digital IDs for everybody and use those IDs as places where you can aggregate and otherwise take advantage of and indeed control data and the persons associated with it. Our friend Reggie Littlejohn has described this phenomenon as a digital gulag in the making, and it is a source of concern that while I don't think that is the agenda of Donald Trump, far from it, there are those in his administration who seem to be intent on putting into place pieces of the infrastructure of a digital gulag, which may just be exploited by others, perhaps those of the No Kings movement, if they are in control. Let's talk with Rod Martin about all of this. He knows, whereof he speaks, about the people who are working on the technologies associated with some of these data aggregating and, well, perhaps weaponizing opportunities, certainly in the wrong hands. And I wanted Rod to just explore with you the fact that here you have 7 million Americans, we're told, out in the streets of the United States, across the country, inveighing against Donald Trump for his authoritarian propensities and warning that he is set on becoming a king and misruling us all very brutally. I don't believe that I've heard a mention by any of these folks about the concerns that I just expressed. How is it that they don't seem to be, first and foremost, worried about this idea that we could, well, wake up one fine day and have ourselves a Chinese-style social credit system in place that would make kings of the past jealous?
A lot of these protesters are paid. They have no idea what they're protesting for, and you send journalists in among them, and it becomes readily apparent. A lot of these people are just fed talking points, and they don't really know anything beyond those talking points. But the people who are leading this and the people who really do know what they're there about are projecting. They want the digital gulag. They just want to run it. And no, I don't think Donald Trump has any such agenda. I think it's the exact opposite. But I also don't think that George W. Bush meant for the Patriot Act to be abused, and it certainly has been. You know, this is the problem. We have elections in this country, and sometimes you don't win. So there are significant concerns here, but we've already seen them. I mean, first of all, we've seen them in China. The social credit score system in China results in, for example, you know, they catch you on camera going to a house church, and all of a sudden you show up at the bus station and your bus tickets are canceled. Or you go to the airport and you can't board the plane. And, you know, terrible things happen because they have automated what they used to do with CCP cadres, and they still have those, but the automation is pretty amazing. And by the way, to a great degree, built by our lovely friends at Google and Microsoft and so forth. So could they roll it out here? Well, they kind of did. I mean, that's what we saw under Biden to a degree in the complete blackout on social media of conservative voices. And for example, possibly the most extreme example other than, deplatforming a sitting elected president of the United States, possibly the other most extreme example would be when all of social media blacked out the New York Post. I mean, a major national newspaper, the New York Post, because it had the temerity to go out and report on Hunter Biden's laptop, which they absolutely could not allow to be talked about in the run-up to the 2020 election, because they had polling that showed that issue could flip the election to Trump. Okay, that's just election manipulation. That's election interference by any reasonable definition. And if you can't speak, you can't be free. You can't have a debate. You can't have meaningful elections. So they've already gone there. But would they go further? Sure. Central bank digital currency is one way to do it. There are things you can do with digital IDs. We're constantly under surveillance. I think the average American is on camera like 22 times a day now. I mean, there's no way for your movements not to be tracked. And of course, you're also carrying around a tracking device in your pocket all day. I have too, because here's my Apple Watch, So
listening device and camera and other means of engaging in that kind of surveillance.
Yeah. So the only way you can control that is through elections. You have to have good laws that prevent abuse of these technologies that are not going to go away. You have to have good people in control of them. You have to police that relentlessly. You have to not do stupid things like have electronic voting machines, because there's not an electronic voting machine that exists that can't be hacked. If you want to be smart, you can have freedom. If you want to be lazy, you will lose it.
You will lose it indeed. Rod Martin, words to live by. We have to leave it at that. Thank you, my friend. Come back to us next week, and I hope the rest of you will do the same next time. Until then, go forth and multiply.